The largest one grabbed her apron strap and yanked her backward into the brick wall so hard she gasped. "Don't scream, bitch," he said, his face inches from hers, grinning like this was the best part of his night. The woman pressed against the wall didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at him with dark eyes that were doing something no terrified waitress's eyes had any business doing. Calculating. At the far end of the alley, a police officer in navy blue stood completely still in the shadows. His German shepherd had stopped walking 30 seconds ago and was staring at the woman, not the men, with the rigid, focused attention of an animal that had recognized something the humans hadn't caught up to yet. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because what happened in that alley after midnight is going to change the way you see every quiet person who has ever been underestimated. Jake Mercer had been a K-9 officer for 14 months. He was 25 years old, dark brown hair cut short, navy blue uniform pressed and fully geared, badge catching whatever light the street threw at it. He wasn't the oldest officer on the night rotation, and he wasn't the most decorated. But he had Scout, and Scout had made him into something considerably more than he would have been without the dog. Scout was a German shepherd, tan and black, amber eyes that moved constantly and missed nothing. 3 years old, 72 pounds of trained attention, and in 14 months of working together, Scout had never been wrong about a person. Not once. They were working the bar district on a Thursday midnight patrol. Routine. The kind of shift that was mostly about presence. Being visible enough that the wrong decisions didn't get made in the first place. Jake walked the perimeter of the Anchor Bar's block, Scout at his left side on a short lead, both of them moving with the easy rhythm of a team that had found its pace. Scout stopped at the alley entrance. Not the narcotics alert. Not the explosive trace alert. Something Jake had learned to read in the months they'd been together. The specific, full-body stillness Scout used when he had identified a person who needed to be found. Jake didn't pull the leash. He never pulled the leash when Scout made this alert. He just stopped and followed the dog's line of attention into the alley. He saw 3 men first. Tattooed arms, heavy boots, the body language of people who had decided the rules of the space belonged to them. One of them, the largest, had his back to the alley entrance and was positioned against the brick wall on the left side, blocking something Jake couldn't fully see yet. Then the large one shifted his weight, and Jake saw the woman. Dark hair, long, loose around her shoulders, olive green shirt, military camouflage cargo pants, an apron tied at her waist that she clearly hadn't had time to remove after her shift. She was pressed against the brick, with the largest man about a foot from her face, and 2 others positioned to cut off the exit behind her. The one on the right had a phone up, recording. Jake's hand moved to his radio instinctively, then stopped. Because Scout wasn't looking at the 3 men. Scout was looking at her. His amber eyes were fixed on the woman with the intensity he used for the specific category of person he had identified as something other than what they appeared. Jake moved into the shadows at the alley entrance and watched. "Don't act shy now," the large one said. His voice carried easy cruelty, the voice of a man who had run this particular script enough times to find it boring. "We just want to talk." "Please," the woman said, soft, almost breaking. "I'm just trying to go home." The large one, Colt, leaned closer. "Nah, you're going to do what we say." He reached out and hooked 2 fingers under her apron strap. "Starting right now." What happened next took less than 2 seconds, and Jake almost missed it. Her wrist came up. Her grip locked around his fingers, with a precision that wasn't defensive and wasn't panicked, and had nothing to do with a waitress finishing a late shift. Colt's knees buckled. His face changed from entertained to confused to something approaching genuine alarm in the space of a breath. Then she released him, stepped back, lowered her eyes, let her shoulders drop and her hands fall loose at her sides, and assembled the scared woman back onto her face, like someone pulling on a familiar coat. But Jake had seen it. Scout had seen it. The dog took one careful step forward and sat down at the alley entrance without making a sound, his eyes still fixed on her, his body humming with the particular held energy of an animal that had made a decision and was waiting for the right moment to act on it. "Oh, so you got claws," Colt said, rubbing his fingers, the alarm already retreating behind his performed confidence. "That's cute." The man with the phone circled wider, making sure the angle captured her face fully. "Smile for the camera, sweetheart." Nora Callahan did not smile. She kept her eyes lowered and her voice soft and said please again. And the please was so well constructed that Jake felt the pull of it even from 20 feet away in the dark. But her feet hadn't moved. They were still positioned exactly where they had been when Colt grabbed her. Not the frightened stillness of someone frozen by shock. The deliberate stillness of someone who had decided not to move yet. Jake had done enough training with Scout to recognize the difference between a person who couldn't act and a person who was choosing not to. Colt grabbed her harder this time. He yanked the apron and pulled her forward until her shoulder hit the brick wall. She made a sound, just enough to register pain, not enough to be a scream. "Say sorry," he said, his breath against her face. "Say sorry for ignoring me." Her eyes closed for 1 second. When they opened, something was in them that had not been there before. Something that didn't match the trembling voice, or the soft pleas, or the scared woman's posture. Something colder. Something that had been somewhere worse than this alley and come out the other side functional. "Please," she said, "don't." Colt laughed. "That's not a no." His hand came up toward her collar. Scout rose from his seated position and took 2 steps forward into the alley without a command. Jake let him go 2 steps and then matched him, moving from the shadows into the dim light at the alley entrance. Hand on Scout's vest, voice coming out level and carrying. "Police, back up, all 3 of you, right now." All 3 men turned. Colt's expression cycled through surprise, irritation, and forced confidence in about 1.5 seconds. He looked at Jake's badge, looked at Scout, looked back at Jake, made the calculation that most people made when they saw a young officer who didn't look much older than they were, and decided he could manage it. "Whoa, whoa," he said, lifting both hands with a grin that was already trying to reclaim the situation. "Officer, we're just talking. Nobody's doing anything wrong here." "Back up," Jake said again. Same volume, same level. Scout stood at his left side and had not taken his eyes off Colt's right hand, the one that had been reaching for the woman's collar, with the motionless, locked attention of a dog that had already calculated the geometry of the space and was waiting. "This is private business," the one with the phone said. He hadn't lowered the phone. "Between us and her. Nothing to do with you." "The recording is done," Jake said. "Put the phone away." "I got rights. I'm allowed to film." "You're allowed to film. You're not allowed to use footage of a non-consenting person to facilitate harassment. Put it away." The third man, who had been standing at the exit end of the alley and hadn't spoken yet, took a small step to the side. Jake's eyes moved to him briefly. Scout's head tracked the motion without turning fully. Nora had not moved from her position against the brick wall. She was watching Jake with an expression that had stopped performing anything. She was reading him the way he had been reading the scene. Fast, thorough, arriving at conclusions she kept off her face. "Lady, you want to tell your boyfriend to back off?" Colt said, redirecting toward her with the specific strategy of someone who had decided that triangulating through the victim was a better angle than engaging the officer directly. Nora looked at him. "He's not my boyfriend," she said. And the way she said it, the specific flatness of it, made Colt blink. "Whatever. Tell him to mind his business." "No," she said. Colt's jaw tightened. Scout made a sound in his throat. Not a bark. The very beginning of something that would become a bark. Held deliberately at the stage where it was more warning than action. Colt looked at the dog. He had been trying to dismiss Scout since the moment Jake appeared. He tried one more time. "Relax, it's just a dog." Jake said one word. "Scout." The German Shepherd did not explode into barking. He took 3 measured steps forward into the alley, placed himself directly between Colt and Nora, and sat down. And then he looked at Colt with amber eyes that were completely without aggression and completely without doubt. The eyes of an animal that had taken its position and was prepared to hold it for as long as necessary and beyond. The alley went quiet. Colt looked at the dog, at Jake, at the dog again. Something shifted in him. Not surrender. Recalculation. He turned back to Nora with a smile that had gone thin and practiced. "We're going to finish this conversation later," he said quietly. "When it's just us." Jake stepped forward. "That conversation isn't happening." Colt turned to look at him slowly, taking his time with it, using the slowness as performance. "Yeah? And who's going to stop it? You?" He let his eyes move over Jake's badge, his uniform, his face. "How old are you, kid? You got a training wheels program in this department?" Jake had been 25 for 4 months. He had heard some version of this observation approximately twice a week since he got the badge. It had stopped producing any effect in him around month 3. "Step away from the wall," Jake said. "All 3 of you. Step away and keep your hands visible." Colt didn't move. His 2 partners looked at each other with the fast, uncertain communication of people realizing the math of the situation had changed. And then the one with the phone did something that changed everything. He aimed the phone not at Nora's face. He aimed it at her shoulder, the one that had hit the brick wall when Colt yanked her, where the collar of her shirt had shifted slightly. He zoomed in. And Jake, watching the screen angle from his position, understood that the man wasn't trying to capture the confrontation for entertainment. He was trying to capture something specific. Something on her shoulder, or her collarbone, or her neck, that he had already been looking for before they grabbed her in this alley. Jake looked at Nora. She had seen it too. Her eyes had gone to the phone, and in the half-second before she controlled her expression, something moved across her face that had nothing to do with a waitress afraid of 3 drunk men in an alley. It looked like someone realizing a timeline had just collapsed. Scout turned his head and looked at Jake. The dog's amber eyes carried the specific communication Jake had learned to read in 14 months of partnership. Not a threat alert, not an aggression cue. The signal that meant the situation had a layer Jake hadn't found yet, and should find quickly. Jake looked at the phone, at Nora, at the way she was standing, and something began assembling in the back of his mind from a briefing he had sat in 8 months ago, in a room he didn't expect to be invited to, about an operator whose file had been sealed and whose civilian relocation had been flagged as priority confidential for reasons that weren't explained to anyone below a certain clearance level. He looked at the scar, barely visible at her collarbone. Old, clean, surgical, the kind that came from shrapnel removal. Jake's hand moved to his vest camera without looking at it. He needed to confirm it was still recording. It was. It had been since he entered the alley. He looked at Colt and said quietly, "Put your hands where I can see them. Right now. All 3 of you." Colt's smile didn't waver. "Or what, rookie?" Scout came to his feet beside Jake without a command, and the word rookie dissolved in the air of the alley like it had never been spoken. Colt stared at Scout for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds was how long it took for the dog's stillness to communicate what his barking would have communicated faster, but less completely. Scout wasn't agitated. He wasn't straining toward anyone. He was simply standing between Colt and Nora, with the absolute patience of an animal that had already decided the outcome and was giving the humans in the room one last opportunity to choose it themselves. Colt chose wrong. "You're not going to do anything," he said to Jake. His voice had that particular quality of a man who needed to believe what he was saying badly enough to say it out loud. "You got no cause. We were just talking." "Hands," Jake said. "Last time." Colt's partner with the phone made a sound that was trying to be a laugh. "He said last time. You hear that?" He turned the phone toward Jake now, filming the badge, the face, reading the name tag out loud. "Officer J. Mercer. Getting this on record, Officer Mercer. You're harassing private citizens." Jake didn't react to his name being read. He looked at the phone, at the angle it had been holding before, the one aimed at Nora's collarbone, and then he looked at Nora. She was watching the man with the phone with an expression that had nothing to do with a waitress and everything to do with someone calculating consequences. Not of the man, of the footage. "The recording stops now," Jake said. "Free country," the man said. "You filmed a woman being physically assaulted without her consent in a private alley. That's not protected speech. That's evidence. And right now, it's evidence that works against you. So I'd suggest you think carefully about what you keep and what you delete." The man lowered the phone slightly. Not all the way. Enough to show he was processing the reframe. Colt used the half-second of distraction to take one step sideways, attempting to put Nora back in his line of access without making it look deliberate. It was a practiced move, the lateral repositioning of someone who had run this script enough times to have developed blocking instincts. Scout moved the same distance in the same direction without being told. Colt stopped. He looked down at the dog. Scout looked up at him. The dog's amber eyes carried zero hostility and zero uncertainty. The expression of an animal that was not performing a threat, but simply occupying space that another body could not simultaneously occupy. "Control your dog," Colt said. "He's controlled," Jake said. "That's what controlled looks like." Nora spoke from behind Scout's shoulder. Her voice was still quiet, but the softness had dried out of it, leaving something more exact underneath. "He's not going to move," she said. "Neither is the officer." She paused. "You should go." Colt's head turned toward her. Something shifted behind his eyes at the tone. Not the scared waitress voice. Not the pleading, "Please." This was different, and he registered it, even if he couldn't name what was different about it. "She's right," Jake said. "Walk out of the alley, all three of you, right now, and this ends here." For a moment, it almost worked. The man with the phone had fully lowered it. The third man at the exit end of the alley had his weight shifted backward, body already angled toward the street, the posture of someone whose commitment to the situation had deteriorated significantly in the last 90 seconds. Then Colt reached into his jacket. Not fast, deliberately, making sure Jake saw the motion before the object appeared, using the ambiguity of the reach as its own kind of weapon. Jake's hand moved to his belt. Scout's posture changed instantly. Forward weight, head down, the shift from stationed to ready that happened in a fraction of a second. What came out of Colt's jacket was a knife. Short blade, cheap handle, the kind of thing that wasn't designed to look serious and was serious anyway. He held it down at his side, not raised, not threatening in any gesture that a camera could clearly capture, but present, available, a message that arrived below the threshold of documentation. "I'm not doing anything," Colt said pleasantly. "Just have my hands where you can see them, like you asked." Jake's jaw tightened. Scout's growl started, low and continuous, the vibration of it carrying through the alley like something physical. Nora moved. Not toward the knife, not away from it. She stepped forward, one measured step, and positioned herself slightly to Jake's right, with her hands loose at her sides and her feet exactly where she needed them to be. And Jake understood, with sudden, complete clarity, that she was not moving to hide behind him. She was establishing a second angle. "You don't want to do this," she said to Colt. Her voice had no fear in it at all now. It was the voice of someone making an accurate assessment of a situation, not an appeal. "Not here. Not with him recording." She tilted her head toward Jake's vest camera. "Not with that running." Colt's eyes went to the camera on Jake's vest. A small thing, easy to miss in the dark. His expression did something complicated. "Whatever that catches is uploading right now," Jake said. "Continuous transmission to department servers. Knife is on record. Your face is on record. His face," he looked at the phone man, "is on record." The third man at the exit made his decision. "I'm out," he said quietly, and walked backward out of the alley without another word. The phone man watched him go. His confidence dropped another floor. Colt didn't move. He was doing the specific calculation of a man whose pride had invested too much in the last 20 minutes to find a clean exit, but whose intelligence was telling him the math had moved against him. The two things were fighting each other, and it was visible in his face. Scout took one step forward. Colt took one step back. The step happened before he chose it, automatic, the body responding to the dog before the mind could assert itself. And then Nora did something that Jake had not anticipated. She stepped fully past Scout, past Jake's shoulder, and stood directly in front of Colt. Close enough that the knife was 18 inches from her body. Close enough that every person in the alley held their breath simultaneously. "Hey!" Jake said sharply. She held up one hand toward him, the same signal from earlier, the one he had almost not recognized the first time. He stopped. Scout stopped. Nora looked at Colt with the specific direct attention of someone who was not afraid of the object in his hand and wanted him to understand that completely before she said another word. Her eyes moved from his face to his wrist to his stance to his shoulder in a 3-second read that was so thorough and so fast that Colt felt it happening without understanding what he was feeling. "You're holding it wrong," she said quietly. Colt blinked. "What?" "Your grip. You're holding it wrong. Your weight is too far forward. And your reaction time from that position, given the angle we're at, is about 3/4 of a second too slow." She said it the way someone said 2 + 2 = 4. "You're not going to use it." Colt stared at her. "Put it down," she said. "Walk out. And don't come back to this neighborhood." Something was happening to Colt's face. The performance was failing, and something real was appearing underneath it. And the real thing was not confidence. "What are you?" he said. The question came out smaller than he intended. "Someone who knows the difference between a person who can use a knife and a person who's holding one," she said. Colt's arm tensed. His grip tightened on the handle. Jake saw it and opened his mouth, and in the same breath, Nora moved. She stepped inside his reach before he had finished deciding to move the knife. Her left hand caught his wrist at exactly the right point. Her right hooked his elbow against the joint's natural resistance, and she drove him forward and down into the brick wall with a controlled force that wasn't maximum and wasn't minimum, and was precisely what was required to put him on the ground without the knife in his hand. The blade hit the wet pavement. Colt made a sound that had no performance in it. His knees were on the ground, and his arm was pinned behind him at an angle that his shoulder was loudly objecting to, and Nora was holding all of it with both hands and breathing normally. She leaned close to his ear. "I told you," she said quietly. "You weren't going to use it." Jake stood 3 feet behind her. Scout sat at his side. Neither of them had moved. The phone man looked at what was on his screen. The footage of the last 40 seconds. Then he looked at Nora. Then he looked at his phone again. "Delete it," Jake said. "That was," the man started. He stopped. He looked at Nora again, with an expression that had moved past shock into something harder to name. "Who is she?" "Delete the footage," Jake said. "Everything from tonight, right now, in front of me." The man's thumb moved over the screen. Jake watched the deletion process without moving closer, keeping his eyes on Colt, who was still on the ground, and still deciding whether he had anything left to invest in the situation. He didn't. "Let him up," Jake said to Nora. She released Colt and stepped back in one motion, and folded herself into something smaller, something quieter, the way she had been doing it all night, reassembling the woman who was just trying to get home. But this time, she didn't fully get there. The posture was a degree off from what it had been, like a costume that had been taken off too many times to sit exactly right anymore. Colt got to his feet slowly, holding his shoulder, his face doing the complicated work of a man processing a significant revision of his own narrative. He looked at Jake. "What is she?" "She's a person who is walking home from work," Jake said. "Get out of this alley." Colt looked at Nora one more time. Then he looked at the knife on the ground, made a decision not to reach for it, and walked toward the alley exit with his remaining partner without speaking again. The alley went quiet. Scout walked to Nora's left side and sat down against her leg without being commanded. Jake looked at her, at the scar at her collarbone, at the way she was standing, at the way Scout had positioned himself, as if he had already decided something about her that Jake was still catching up to. He thought about the briefing 8 months ago, the sealed file, the photograph, the notation that said the operator had completed the mission alone after her team was lost, and had requested immediate civilian reassignment under a name that was not her own. He said it quietly, barely above the ambient noise of the bar behind them. "How long have you been working the anchor?" She looked at him, not with alarm, with assessment. 6 weeks, she said. He nodded slowly. "And before that?" She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at the alley entrance. Then she looked back at him and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Scout pressed his side more firmly against her leg and looked up at her with those amber eyes, and she reached down without looking and put her hand on his head in the practiced motion of someone who had worked beside dogs in conditions that this alley wouldn't recognize. And from the street at the alley entrance, headlights appeared. Not fast. Slow. The specific deliberate pace of a vehicle that was not lost and was not looking for parking. Jake's hand moved to his radio. Scout's head came up from under Nora's hand, and his ears went forward, and his body went rigid with the alert Jake had never seen him use before. Not narcotics, not explosives, not the person alert. Something new. Something that made the hair on the back of Jake's neck stand before he had consciously processed why. The vehicle rolled to a stop at the alley entrance and cut its engine. And Nora, who had just put 3 men on the ground and held a knife at 18 inches without blinking, went completely still. "That's not a patrol car," she said. "No," Jake said. "It's not." The black SUV sat at the alley entrance without moving for 10 full seconds. No one got out. No window came down. Just the vehicle, engine off, sitting there with the specific patience of something that had already decided it wasn't in a hurry because it didn't need to be. Scout's growl had dropped below audible. Jake could feel it through the leash, a continuous vibration running up the leather into his palm, the dog's body communicating what his voice had stopped putting into sound. This was the alert Jake had never encountered in 14 months of patrol. Not the drug alert, not the suspect alert, not the person needs help alert. Something without a category in his training. "Talk to me," Jake said quietly. He was looking at the SUV. He was talking to Nora. She didn't answer immediately. She was doing the thing with her eyes again. The thing he had been watching her do since the moment he stepped into this alley. Reading the available information faster than most people processed single pieces of it. She looked at the vehicle's profile, the plate position, the tint density on the windows, the angle of the front wheels. "It's been here before," she said. Jake looked at her. "What?" "The wheel angle. It's parked exactly the same way it parks when it sits on Carver Street on Tuesday nights." She said it with the flatness of someone reporting a fact they wished they didn't have. "I clocked it 3 weeks ago. I thought I was being careful enough." She paused. "I wasn't." Jake processed that. 3 weeks of surveillance on a woman working a waitress shift. That wasn't opportunistic. That wasn't Colt and his partners acting alone. "They were sent," he said. "They were sent to confirm location," she said. "The phone. They weren't recording for entertainment. They were recording for identification. They needed footage of my face in natural light and natural movement to run against a database." She looked at him. "That SUV has the confirmation now. Whether or not we deleted the biker's footage, the vehicle has its own." Jake looked at his vest camera. Still running. Still transmitting. He pressed his radio and called dispatch, keeping his voice level, giving his location, and requesting a supervisor to his position, without escalating the language. He didn't want sirens. Sirens changed the geometry of situations in ways that were sometimes useful and sometimes the opposite. Dispatch confirmed. 7 minutes. The SUV door opened. One man, mid-30s, dark jacket, clean boots, moving with the deliberate economy of someone who had been trained to enter rooms in ways that didn't announce themselves before he was ready to be announced. He looked at Colt and the phone man, who had stopped walking at the alley entrance when the vehicle appeared, and dismissed them with a single glance, the way you dismissed furniture. Then he looked at Nora. He smiled. Small. Practiced. The smile of someone completing a task. "There you are," he said. Jake stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to identify yourself and state your business in this area." The man looked at him, not dismissively, evaluatively, the look of someone taking a quick inventory of what they were dealing with. "Young officer, 14 months on the job, K9 unit, best camera running." He did the math in approximately 2 seconds. "I'm not your concern tonight, Officer Mercer," he said. The use of his name landed like a small, cold object dropped into the center of Jake's chest. He hadn't introduced himself. The man had read his name tag. Or he had known it before he arrived. "Everyone in this alley is my concern," Jake said. "ID. Now." The man reached into his jacket slowly, telegraphing the motion, and produced a badge case. He held it open, facing Jake. Jake looked at it. The badge was real. The credentials were real. The agency name was real, in the sense that it existed. But it was not FBI, not DEA, not any of the standard federal designations that Jake had been briefed on. It was something he had seen referenced exactly once, in a footnote of a classified document summary that a supervising officer had shown him briefly 8 months ago, in a context that had not fully made sense until this exact moment. Jake kept his face neutral. "What's your interest in this individual?" "She's part of an ongoing federal matter," the man said. "I need you to stand aside and let me complete a lawful transfer." "She's a witness in an active assault incident I'm currently processing," Jake said. "She's not going anywhere until my supervisor arrives and we complete documentation." The man's eyes moved to Nora. Something passed between them that Jake couldn't fully read, a history he didn't have access to, communicated in the specific compressed language of people who had occupied the same world before it separated them into different sides of an alley. "Nora," the man said, not hard, almost gentle. "You know this was always going to end." Nora said nothing. Scout took 3 steps toward the man and stopped. Not barking, not growling audibly, just placed himself in the space between the man and Nora, with the absolute economy of an animal that had made a decision and was not going to unmake it. The man looked at the dog, then at Jake. "Call him off." "He's not on," Jake said. "That's just where he wants to stand." A second door opened on the SUV. Another man, same jacket profile, same trained stillness, came around the front of the vehicle and stopped at the alley entrance. He put his hands in his jacket pockets, in the way people put their hands in their jacket pockets when they want you to think about what might be in them. Jake's radio crackled. "Dispatch confirming Supervisor ETA, now 5 minutes." The first man heard it. His timeline had just compressed. "Officer Mercer," he said, his voice shifting into something that carried a specific kind of patience. The patience of someone who was about to explain something once and expected it to be sufficient. "I understand you're doing your job. I respect that. But this situation involves a level of federal jurisdiction that supersedes your department's authority in this specific case. I'm not asking you to do anything improper. I'm asking you to step back and allow a federal matter to proceed lawfully." "Show me the paperwork," Jake said. "Excuse me?" "Transfer authority, warrant, court order, whatever documentation authorizes you to remove a person from a scene where I am the responding officer." Jake held the man's gaze. "Show me the paperwork and I step back. That's how this works." The man looked at him for a long moment. His composure was intact, but something underneath it had tightened. "That documentation is classified." "Then I can't act on it," Jake said. "My supervisor will be here in 5 minutes. You can present whatever you have to him, and we'll proceed from there." Nora made a small sound beside him. Not a word, a breath. The sound of someone watching a timeline collapse around them and trying to decide what that meant for the decisions they still had available. Jake glanced at her. Her face was doing something he hadn't seen it do yet in the 45 minutes he had been in this alley. Not fear, not calculation. Something older and more complicated than either. The expression of someone who had been running for long enough that they had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone run alongside them. The first man took 1 step forward. Scout's growl came back, audible this time, low and continuous, and entirely without ambiguity. The man stopped. He looked at Scout with the expression of a trained person making a professional assessment of a trained animal. He looked at Jake. He looked at his partner at the alley entrance. He looked at Nora. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "I'm making it exactly as hard as procedure requires," Jake said. Then Nora spoke. Her voice was quiet, and it was not performing anything, and it was not asking for anything. It was the voice of someone who had been small for 6 weeks and was choosing, in this specific moment, to stop. "Who sent you?" she said. It wasn't a question. The inflection was flat, the tone of someone who already knew the hierarchy and wanted confirmation of the specific branch. The man looked at her. "You know who." "I know who signed the original order," she said. "I'm asking who activated this retrieval." A pause, longer than it should have been, long enough to be informative. "That's above what I'm authorized to share in the field," the man said. "It changed hands," Nora said. Not to him. To herself, working it out. The program changed hands, and whoever holds it now decided a sealed file was a liability worth clearing. She looked at Jake. Her eyes were steady and direct, and completely without the performance she had been maintaining all night.
If they get me into that vehicle, there is no documentation that supports my continued existence. That's not a figure of speech.
Jake looked at her for one full second. He believed her. Not because she had given him evidence. Not because he had the clearance to verify anything she was saying. But because Scout had believed her from the moment they entered this alley. And in 14 months, Jake had learned that Scout's read on a person was the most accurate instrument he had access to. He turned back to the man in the dark jacket. "She's not going in that vehicle," Jake said. The man's composure held, but his patience did not. "Officer, I'm going to need you to understand the legal position you are currently." "I understand my legal position," Jake said. "I am the responding officer at the scene of an active assault. This individual is a witness and a victim. I am not authorized to release her to any party, federal or otherwise, without documentation, supervisor approval, and confirmation of lawful transfer authority." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. That's not a negotiation. That's procedure. The second man at the alley entrance took his hands out of his jacket pockets. Scout stopped growling. The silence that replaced it was considerably more alarming. Jake's hand moved to his belt. Not to his weapon, to his radio. He pressed it and spoke clearly, giving his location, stating that he had federal agents on scene requesting an unauthorized transfer of an assault victim and requesting immediate supervisor response and an additional unit. Dispatch confirmed. His voice was calm. His heart rate was not. The first man looked at his partner. A communication happened between them that used no words and took about 2 seconds, and resulted in both of them going very still, in the way people went still when they were deciding whether the path they were on was still viable or whether the variables had shifted enough to require a different approach. The man looked at Jake. "Your supervisor is going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you." "Maybe," Jake said, "but he's going to tell me in person, with documentation I can put in a report." That's the difference. A third door opened on the SUV. Everyone in the alley turned. The man who got out was older, 50s, suit, not jacket. The kind of suit that communicated a different level of the same authority. He walked to the alley entrance and stopped beside the second man and looked at the situation with a specific assessment of someone who had arrived to manage a problem that had become more complicated than anticipated. He looked at Jake's vest camera for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at the second man and said, quietly but audibly, "How long has that been running?" "Since he entered the alley," the second man said. The older man's expression did not change outwardly, but something behind it did. The specific internal adjustment of someone recalculating a risk profile in real time. He looked at Nora. He opened a folder. Photographs inside, visible at an angle that Jake couldn't fully read, but Nora could. And what happened to her face when she saw them was the first thing in the entire night that looked like something she hadn't prepared for. Her jaw tightened. Her hands curled at her sides, not into fists, into the position of someone absorbing something painful and choosing not to let the pain reach their face the rest of the way. "Your cover is burned," the older man said. Not cruelly, with the flat professionalism of someone delivering a factual update. The identity, the bar, the neighborhood, all of it is burned. Coming with us is the only option that keeps the situation contained. Nora looked at the photographs for a long moment. Then she looked at Jake, and Jake saw something in her expression that he understood without being able to explain why he understood it. The specific look of someone who has been running alone for long enough to have forgotten that running alone was a choice and not a requirement, and who was, in this moment, considering the possibility that it didn't have to be. My camera has been transmitting since I entered the alley, Jake said to the older man. Everything you just said is on record at my department. Everything those men did. He looked at Colt and the phone man still standing frozen at the alley entrance. Is on record. And if this woman gets into that vehicle tonight and I can't account for her location and condition in my incident report, that record becomes a problem that no classified file is going to manage. The older man looked at him. Really looked at him. The look of someone revising an assessment they had made too quickly. Scout walked to Nora's side and sat against her leg and looked up at the older man with amber eyes that carried no threat and complete conviction. The older man looked at the dog. He closed the folder. He looked at his two agents. He looked at Jake. He looked at his watch. Somewhere on the street behind the SUV, a second set of headlights appeared. Jake's supervisor. 4 minutes early. The older man made a decision. We'll be in contact through official channels, he said. To Nora, not to Jake. This isn't finished. I know, Nora said. He turned and walked back to the SUV. His agents followed. The vehicle started and pulled away from the alley entrance without rushing. The same deliberate pace it had arrived with, leaving behind a silence that felt physical after the wait of the last several minutes. Colt and the phone man stood at the alley entrance, looking at the space the SUV had occupied, as if they were trying to understand how they had become irrelevant to a situation they thought they controlled. Jake's supervisor's car pulled up behind them. Jake looked at Nora. She was still looking at the direction the SUV had gone. Her hand was resting on Scout's head, without her having noticed she put it there. Scout was leaning into it, with his eyes half closed. The posture of an animal that had done the work it came to do, and was allowing itself, briefly, to simply be present. You bought time, she said quietly. Not gratitude, not relief. Acknowledgement. The word of someone who understood exactly what had been given, and what it cost, and what it didn't solve. Time is what we work with, Jake said. She looked at him, the full, direct look she had been giving him since she stopped performing anything. They're going to come back through official channels. Your supervisor is going to get pressure from people above him. The paperwork they file is going to be correct and documented and entirely lawful, and it is going to put me in a position I cannot manage from inside a legal framework. I know, Jake said. Then why did you do it? Jake looked at Scout. Scout looked at Nora. The dog's amber eyes were steady and warm and entirely without uncertainty. Because he knew something was wrong from the moment you walked into this alley, Jake said. And I've learned not to argue with his read on people. Nora looked at the dog for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, the words that told Jake everything about what the last 6 weeks had actually cost her. Nobody has done that in a long time, she said. Done what? Jake asked. Stayed, she said. Supervisor Denton was 51 years old, 23 years on the force, and had the specific quality of stillness that came from having seen enough situations to stop being surprised by them. He got out of his car, looked at the alley, looked at Colt and the phone man still standing at the entrance, looked at Jake, looked at Nora, looked at Scout, and said nothing for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, "Talk to me." Jake talked to him. Efficient, sequential, everything on the record. The assault, the 3 men, the phone, the knife, the SUV, the federal agents, the folder, the older man in the suit. He gave Denton the agency name from the badge case and watched his supervisor's expression do something small and controlled that communicated more than a larger reaction would have. Denton knew the name. "How long was your camera running?" Denton asked. "From the alley entrance," Jake said. "Continuous transmission." Denton looked at Nora. His expression was the expression of a man doing a calculation that had more variables than he had expected when he pulled up to this location. He looked at her olive green shirt, her camouflage cargo pants, the scar at her collarbone, the way she was standing. He had 23 years of reading people in the field, and what he was reading right now was producing an answer that didn't fit any of his standard categories. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "do you want to tell me who you are?" Nora looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Jake. Then she made a decision that Jake could see her making, the specific internal motion of someone choosing to extend trust to a person they have not fully evaluated because the alternative is worse. "My name is Nora Callahan," she said. "I have a sealed service record with the United States Navy. I've been living under a relocation designation for 14 months. Tonight, my cover location was confirmed by the people who have been looking for me, and I have approximately," she paused, "a short window before whatever they file through official channels reaches this department and makes my situation considerably more complicated." Denton was quiet for 3 seconds. "Sealed how?" "Classified how," she said. "There's a difference." He absorbed that. He looked at Jake. Jake kept his face neutral, which was the face of a man who had more questions than his supervisor, and was currently choosing to ask none of them out loud. "The agents who were here," Denton said to Nora, "what do they want?" "They want me in a vehicle," she said. "What happens after that is not something I have reliable information about." She paused, and the pause carried everything she wasn't going to put into words, in an open alley, with Colt and the phone man still within earshot. "But the program I was part of has a history of resolving its accountability problems through methods that don't generate paperwork." Denton looked at her for a long time. Scout walked from Jake's side to Denton's feet and looked up at him. The dog had never done that before. In 14 months, Scout had performed his alert behaviors for Jake and offered his trust to Jake, and occasionally to other officers he had worked with over time. He had never walked unsolicited to a supervisor and looked at him with that specific amber gaze. Denton looked down at Scout. Then he looked back at Nora, and something in his expression shifted. The calculation had landed somewhere he hadn't expected it to land. "Colt," he said, without looking away from Nora. Colt, who had been standing at the alley entrance, trying to be invisible in the way people tried to be invisible when they understood they had miscalculated everything, looked up. "You and your friend sit on that curb," Denton said. "Don't speak. Don't move. Don't look at your phone. We're going to have a conversation about assault charges and contractual relationships with federal agencies in about 10 minutes. Colt opened his mouth. "Curb," Denton said. They sat on the curb. Denton turned back to Nora. He lowered his voice. "What do you need right now? Tonight, specifically?" She looked at him with the expression of someone unaccustomed to being asked that question in a way that sounded like it expected a real answer. "Time and distance," she said. "The camera footage from tonight is leverage, but it expires. The moment they file the right paperwork through the right channels, your department is legally required to cooperate. That window is," she looked at her watch, "maybe 4 hours. 5 if whoever drafted the original recall order needs to be woken up." "4 hours to do what?" Jake said. She looked at him. "Make a call. There's a person I've been avoiding contacting because contacting them means the situation becomes active instead of dormant. Tonight, it became active, whether I contacted them or not." She paused. "They have the kind of access that can put this back in a box, legally, permanently. But I have to reach them before the recall order processes or the option disappears." "Who is this person?" Denton said. "Someone who was supposed to be in that folder," she said, and wasn't. Jake and Denton exchanged a look. The look of two people who had arrived at the same understanding through different routes and were confirming that they were looking at the same thing. The twist hit Jake then. Not loudly, quietly. The way things arrived when they reordered everything that came before them. The folder the older man had opened. The photographs inside. Nora's reaction when she saw them. The jaw tightening. The hands curling. The expression of someone absorbing something unexpected. She hadn't been looking at photographs of her team, her mission, her history. She had been looking at something that told her who was missing from the picture, who had been removed from the record before the folder reached the field. Someone had cleaned the file. Someone, with enough clearance to edit what the retrieval team carried, had removed a specific person from the documentation. Not to protect that person, to protect the operation, which meant the person who had been removed was still in a position to affect the outcome. And Nora had recognized the absence. "Jake," Denton said quietly, "I need you to take her to the secondary station, not the main house, secondary. Sign her in as a material witness under the assault case, which she is, legitimately, which means the documentation is clean." He looked at Nora. "That buys you inside time away from a public location while you make your call. Whatever that call produces, we deal with it when it produces it. The agents will come to the secondary station when the recall processes," Nora said. "Then we'll have the conversation there, with documentation and supervision, instead of in an alley at 1 in the morning," Denton said. "It's not a solution. It's a better position." "Better position is what I work with," Nora said. Something shifted in her. Jake watched it happen. The 6 weeks of small, careful steps and cash wages, and the deliberate smallness she had been performing since she walked through the door of the Anchor Bar. He could see it sitting differently in her now. Not gone, not resolved, but held differently. The way you held something when you understood you didn't have to hold it entirely alone anymore. Scout went back to her side and pressed against her leg. She looked down at him. Her hand went to his head again, that same practiced motion, and she stood there for a moment, with the dog leaning against her and the night moving around them. And something in her face that was not relief and was not peace, but was the very beginning of a decision to stop running in one direction and start moving in another. "There's something you should know," she said, to Jake specifically, "before we go anywhere." Jake waited. "The men who sent the SUV tonight, they're not the primary problem. They're the mechanism of a primary problem." She looked at him directly. "The primary problem is that someone in a position of significant oversight decided that my continued existence as a free person was a strategic liability. That decision was made 14 months ago when my file was sealed. Tonight, it was acted on." She paused. "What that means for you is that by putting yourself between me and that vehicle, you stepped into a situation that has a longer timeline than tonight." Jake looked at her. "How much longer?" "Until the call I'm going to make produces a result. Or until it doesn't," she said. "If it produces a result, the problem goes back into the box and everyone walks away with clean paperwork." She held his gaze. "If it doesn't, the people who sent that SUV are going to look at the officer who interfered with their retrieval, and they are going to file paperwork of their own." "What kind of paperwork?" Jake said. "The kind that makes careers difficult," she said. "At minimum." Jake was quiet for a moment. Scout looked up at him. Those amber eyes, steady and warm and completely without uncertainty. The eyes of an animal that had decided something in this alley that had nothing to do with commands or training, and everything to do with the specific frequency of who a person actually was. "Make the call," Jake said. Nora looked at him, the full, unperformed look. "You understand what I just said." "I understood it," Jake said. "Make the call." She held his gaze for 2 seconds longer than necessary. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her cargo pants and produced a phone that was not a smartphone, not anything commercially available. A slim device with no brand marking and a single physical button on the side that she pressed once and held. The screen lit with a single number. Not a contact name, just digits. She looked at it for a moment. Then she made the call that she had been not making for 14 months, standing in an alley in a waitress uniform, with a 25-year-old police officer beside her, and his German shepherd pressed against her leg, in the specific way that certain decisions got made. Not because the moment was right, but because the alternative had finally become worse than the action. The line connected on the second ring. A voice answered. She spoke 4 words. 4 words that Jake couldn't fully hear, but that produced a response he could see traveling through her body from the moment the voice on the other end registered them. Her shoulders lowered by a degree that was barely visible and entirely significant. The tension she had been carrying since the SUV appeared, maybe since before that, maybe since before the alley, left her face in a way that didn't make her look relieved, so much as it made her look real. Like a person who had been very slightly somewhere else for a long time and had just come back. She listened for 40 seconds without speaking. Then she said yes. Then she ended the call. She looked at Jake. 4 hours, she said. If nothing changes, 4 hours. Then we move, Jake said. She nodded. Scout stepped forward without being told, positioning himself at her left side for the walk, the post he had chosen the moment he stopped in front of the alley entrance and refused to keep walking until Jake followed. Denton watched them and said nothing. He had 23 years on the force, and the specific stillness of a man who understood when a situation had moved past what he controlled, into something that was going to resolve, or not resolve, on a timeline that didn't consult him. He looked at Colt on the curb. "You," he said. "Start talking." Jake walked Nora out of the alley with Scout between them, and behind them, the alley held what it had held for the last hour. A knife on the wet pavement, a broken phone near the dumpster, and the particular residue of a night that had started as one thing and become entirely another. Nora walked without looking back. Jake matched her pace. Scout's tail moved once, steady and certain, like something that had been waiting a long time to be correct, and finally was. The secondary station was a converted building 3 blocks from the main precinct, used for overflow processing and witness holding. It was quieter than the main house, fewer officers moving through, fewer eyes on the door. Jake had chosen it specifically for that reason. Nora sat in the small room they used for material witness documentation, with Scout at her feet and a cup of coffee she hadn't touched on the table in front of her. Her apron was still tied at her waist. She hadn't removed it. Jake had noticed that and said nothing about it, because it seemed like the kind of thing that had a reason, even if the reason wasn't available yet. He sat across from her, with his incident report open on his tablet, filling in what he could fill in, and leaving the gaps that couldn't be filled without information he didn't have clearance to hold. "You should document everything," she said. "All of it. Exactly as it happened." He looked up. "Some of what happened tonight involves classified information." "Document what you observed," she said, "not what you interpreted, what you saw. The agents at the alley entrance, the badge, the folder, the request for transfer, your refusal pending documentation." She held his gaze. "If the call I made produces what it's supposed to produce, that documentation becomes the record that closes the loop. If it doesn't produce that, the documentation is the only thing that keeps you protected." Jake looked at her. "You're thinking about my protection. You stepped into something tonight that has a longer memory than tonight," she said. "Yes, I'm thinking about your protection." Scout lifted his head from the floor and looked at Nora, then at Jake, then back at Nora, following the conversation with the alert attention of an animal tracking something it couldn't hear, but could feel. Jake filed the report as she described. Everything observed, nothing interpreted. His language was clean and sequential, and entirely accurate, and told the true story in the specific way that true stories needed to be told when they were going into systems that might be accessed by people who wanted them to say something different. He was halfway through when his phone vibrated. Denton. He answered. "The agency filed," Denton said. "Transfer authority request through federal channels. It's sitting on the watch commander's desk right now." Jake looked at Nora. She was watching him with the expression of someone who had been expecting this and had been hoping to be wrong. "How long before it processes?" Jake said. 40 minutes if the watch commander acts immediately," Denton said. "He's read it. He called me. He's waiting." A pause. "Jake, the paperwork is clean. I looked at it. If it processes, I can't stop it legally." Jake kept his voice level. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I had an officer with a material witness in active assault documentation, and that releasing the witness before the assault case was processed would create procedural issues that I needed time to evaluate." Another pause. "That bought maybe 20 minutes. After that, I don't have ground to stand on." Jake ended the call. He looked at Nora. 20 minutes. She nodded once. Not panicked. The nod of someone absorbing a timeline. She looked at the phone she had used in the alley, the unmarked device, still on the table in front of her. "The person you called," Jake said. "What are they doing with 4 hours?" "Making their own calls," she said. "The program I was part of had oversight that was supposed to be independent of the branch that's been managing my file. If the person I contacted can reach that oversight before the transfer processes, the transfer gets suspended pending review." She paused. "Review takes time. Time is what I need." "And if they can't reach oversight in 20 minutes? She looked at her hands. "Then the paperwork processes, and you are legally required to release me to the agency." Jake looked at Scout. Scout looked at the door. "Is there anything—" Jake started. "No," she said. "You've done everything you can do within the framework you operate in. You documented it correctly. You bought time through legitimate procedure. If this resolves, it resolves because of what you did tonight." She held his gaze. "If it doesn't, it's not because you failed. It's because the thing you were up against was bigger than one officer's procedure." Jake wanted to say something to that. He couldn't find the right shape for it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." 6 weeks in that bar. Cash wages. No name on anything. He looked at her. "That's not nothing. That's a specific kind of hard." She was quiet for a moment. "It's manageable hard," she said. "I've done harder." "That's not what I'm asking." She looked at him. The full, direct look. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you were okay," he said. "Before tonight. In the actual daily sense. Were you okay?" The question landed differently than she expected. He could see that. Something moved through her expression that she didn't fully control. A crack in the composure that was not dramatic and was not brief. It was the crack of someone who had been asked a real question and found that they didn't have a rehearsed answer for it, because no one had asked it in a long time. "No," she said. "Not really." Jake nodded. Scout got up from the floor and put his head in Nora's lap. The motion was so sudden and so complete that she made a small, involuntary sound. Not pain. Something closer to the sound of a person receiving something they had stopped expecting. Her hand went to his head automatically. The practiced touch. The motion that knew exactly where the pressure point was behind his ears. Scout closed his eyes. Nora looked at the dog for a long moment. When she looked back up, something in her face had settled into something more honest than anything Jake had seen from her all night. Not broken, Not resigned, just real. "I had a team," she said. "They were the best people I've ever known. The mission went wrong, and I was the only one who came back. And for 14 months, I have been living in the specific guilt of a person who survived when the people she would have traded places with didn't." She paused. That's what the bar was. That's what the apron was. That's what the "please just let me go" was. She looked at her hands. Plain small enough that nothing could find me, including the parts of myself I didn't want to sit with. Jake said nothing. He understood that some things were not answered by words, and that trying to answer them that way was the wrong response. His phone vibrated again. Unknown number. He looked at Nora. She looked at the phone. She nodded once. He answered. A voice he didn't recognize, older, formal, measured. It asked his name, his badge number, his location. He gave all three. The voice confirmed receipt of his incident report documentation, confirmed the vest camera transmission had been received and logged at the federal oversight level, and then said 4 words that Jake felt land in his chest like something physical. The transfer is suspended. He kept his face neutral. Pending what? Pending a full oversight review of the program authorization chain, the voice said. That review will take no less than 60 days. During that time, the individual in your custody is to be maintained as a protected material witness under your department's jurisdiction. Full federal cooperation will be extended to your supervising officer for that period. Understood, Jake said. Officer Mercer, the voice said, your documentation was thorough. It made the difference. The call ended. Jake set the phone on the table. Nora was watching him with the stillness of someone who had trained themselves out of hope, because hope had a specific cost when it didn't produce results, and who was currently fighting that training, because his expression was telling her something before his mouth did. 60 days, he said. Oversight review. Transfer suspended. She held his gaze for 1 full second. Then she exhaled. 1 long, complete breath. The kind that came from somewhere deep and had been waiting a long time to be released. Scout's head was still in her lap, and she pressed both hands into his fur and held them there, and Scout remained completely still and let her. Jake watched this and thought about the briefing 8 months ago. The sealed file, the photograph, the notation that said the operator had finished the mission alone. He thought about what it cost to finish something alone, and then carry the finishing of it alone for 14 months, inside a waitress apron and cash wages, and a carefully managed smallness designed to make sure nothing could find her. He thought about Scout stopping in front of that alley entrance. He thought about the fact that his dog had known something before Jake had any information to work with. Had simply known, the way certain animals knew, through whatever instrument was older and more accurate than language, that the woman pressed against that brick wall was not what she was performing, and was worth protecting, and was not going to be left. What happens now? Nora said. Her voice was quiet, and it was genuine, and it was the voice of someone who was starting to believe they had a now to ask about. Now you're a protected material witness, Jake said, which means you stay within documented reach for 60 days, which means you're not in that bar alone at 1 a.m. He paused. And which means the next time someone sends a vehicle into an alley after you, there's a paper trail that makes it considerably more complicated for them. 60 days is not a permanent solution, she said. No, Jake said. It's time. Like you said. Time is what you work with. She looked at him. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same direction. You were listening. I listened to Scout, and I listened to the people Scout listens to, Jake said. So far, that policy has a good record. Scout lifted his head from her lap and looked at Jake with those amber eyes, and then looked at Nora, and then stood up and stretched, with the full body stretch of an animal that had completed something significant and was ready for whatever came next. Nora looked at the dog, then at Jake, then at the untouched coffee on the table, which she picked up and finally drank. The secondary station was quiet around them. The night outside was moving toward the part that became early morning, the specific dark that preceded light without announcing it, the hours that existed between what had happened and what was going to happen next. Nora set the coffee down. "I need to tell you something," she said. Jake waited. "My team," she said. "The mission. What happened?" She looked at the table for a moment. "I've never said it out loud to anyone who wasn't in a debrief room and wasn't writing it down for a file that got sealed." She looked up. "I don't know if I can yet, but I think I need to." Jake said nothing for a moment. He looked at Scout, who had positioned himself between them with the patient certainty of an animal who understood that the most important thing happening in this room right now was not a threat to neutralize, but a weight being set down, and that the correct response to a weight being set down was to stay still and let it happen. "When you're ready," Jake said. "There's no clock on it." She nodded, looked at her hands. Outside, the city continued its ordinary business in the specific way cities continued their ordinary business at 2 in the morning, without awareness of what had been decided in the small room in a secondary station by two 25-year-olds and a German shepherd who had stopped walking in front of an alley because he recognized something worth recognizing. Some people spend years playing small in the hope that smallness will keep them safe. And some nights, in some alleys, a dog stops walking, and a young officer follows his dog, and what gets protected is not just a person's safety, but a person's right to stop pretending they are less than what they are. Nora Callahan had been small for 14 months. She was done with that now. And the night that ended it had not ended with a dramatic rescue, or a public vindication, or anything that would make the news, or appear in any record that civilians could access. It ended with a cup of bad coffee and a dog's head in her lap, and a 25-year-old officer who had stayed in the specific way that the people who matter most always stay, without being asked and without requiring anything in return. That is what courage looks like when it is not performing for anyone. It looks exactly like that.